So if you were one of the thousands of people caught in that recent travel chaos across India, your canceled flight was way more than just a delay. It was actually a signpost for a much, much bigger story. A story about how your choices, as a consumer, are quietly starting to disappear. Let's break down what that mess at India's airports really tells us.
You know, this crisis wasn't just about numbers. It was about thousands of individual stories of pure desperation. We're talking about families, students, people just trying to get to a loved one's side. And suddenly, their lives were thrown into complete turmoil, stranded in terminals with zero information and absolutely nowhere to go.
And the scale of this disruption was just staggering. I mean, we're not talking about a few dozen delayed flights here. Over 2,000 cancellations in just a few days. This wasn't some minor hiccup. It was a total, full-blown meltdown of the biggest airline in the country.
And the fallout from that? It was immediate, and it was devastating. Airports all over the country, which are normally these bustling, organized places, started to look more like chaotic bus stations. The entire system was just completely overwhelmed.
This is what it actually looked like for people on the ground. People were missing the most important moments of their lives. And with IndiGo basically grounded, the other airlines jacked up their prices like crazy. Suddenly, a flight from Delhi to Ranchi was more expensive than a flight to London. This whole mess really exposed a huge vulnerability in India's entire air travel network.
So the big question is, what on earth caused this massive meltdown? Well, it turns out there are two very, very different stories about what really happened. Let's get into it.
Okay, so at the very heart of this whole conflict are these new safety rules called FDTL rules. They were put in place by India's aviation authority for a really simple and really important reason: to make flying safer for all of us by making sure pilots are properly rested.
And these changes were pretty significant. Pilots now needed a full 48 hours of rest every week, which is up from 36. And the number of tricky night landings they could do was cut way down. So what's the bottom line? Well, to keep flying the same number of planes, airlines like IndiGo were going to need more pilots on their team.
And right here is where the two stories just completely diverge. On one side, you have IndiGo's official line. It was an unavoidable collapse, a perfect storm of new rules, bad weather, and some technical issues. But on the other side, you have the pilots' version. They say this was a deliberate, silent protest, that IndiGo knew about these rules for months but chose to freeze hiring to create a crisis and force the government to delay the new safety rules.
This whole crisis brings up a much bigger question, though. How is it even possible for the problems of just one airline to paralyze the entire country's travel network? To get that, we need to understand just how much power IndiGo really has.
This one number says it all: 62%. Just let that sink in. When one company controls almost 2/3 of an essential service like flying, its problems become everyone's problems. It has, for all practical purposes, become too big to fail.
IndiGo's growth was absolutely meteoric. They built their empire on being super efficient, on time, and cheap. And while all their competitors, you remember them, Kingfisher, Jet Airways, Go Air, while they all struggled and eventually went under, IndiGo just kept expanding, pushing into smaller cities until it completely dominated the skies.
And this chart right here shows you the reality of the market today. I mean, look at it. It's basically a two-horse race between IndiGo and Air India. Everybody else? They're just fighting for the tiny scraps left over. This serious lack of real competition is at the very heart of the problem.
But here's the thing. This story isn't really just about airplanes. What happened with IndiGo is a pattern. It's part of a much wider and frankly more worrying trend that's happening across all of India's most important industries.
So in aviation, we've watched a market that once had more than 8 major airlines shrink down to basically just 2 big players.
It is the exact same story in telecom. Remember when you had more than 10 different mobile companies to choose from? After years of price wars, that choice has shrunk dramatically. Now you've only got 2 or 3 real options. It's even happening in something as basic as cement. You know, the stuff we build everything with. Smaller companies are getting swallowed up by giants, and now just a handful of players control over half the market.
And yup, we see this exact same pattern in how our critical infrastructure is managed, our ports and our airports. Competition is fading away as one single corporate group gets a bigger and bigger piece of the pie.
So what's the deal? What does this whole trend of shrinking competition actually mean for you, for your wallet, for the quality of service you get, and for your rights as a customer?
Well,
When just a few huge players control an entire industry, the whole game changes. You, the customer, are no longer king. You kind of become a captured audience. Your ability to choose another option disappears, and right along with it goes your power to demand better prices or better service.
This is the fundamental shift we're seeing. We're moving away from a system of healthy competition that's good for consumers and into what you could call a captured market, where just a few powerful companies get to call all the shots. And the IndiGo crisis? That was a very stark reminder of what that really looks and feels like.
So in the end, the IndiGo meltdown wasn't just about canceled flights and chaos at the airport. It was a clear warming sign, a glimpse into a future where all of us have fewer options and less control. And it really leaves us with this one final critical question to think about.